Hi, I'm Gia Mills and welcome to True Reflections, the beauty podcast where my guests reflect on how they feel about their appearance and what really lies beneath the surface. Don't forget to follow us wherever you're watching or listening. You can find our Instagram on @TrueReflectionsPodcast. My guest today is a journalist whose new book, She Wanted More, is out by now. In this interview, we will talk about suicide. So if you are affected, please visit thesamaritans.org.uk or call them on 116 123. But for now, to tell her beauty journey, please welcome to True Reflections, Poorna Bell.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, I've read your book, and as a woman who is 52, single, child-free, worried about my appearance as I'm aging, your book was really profound because it felt like a kind of like someone hears me, someone sees me as kind of feeling like someone in society that isn't really considered, and if they are, it's not considered in a high regard. It felt like a warm blanket that went, you're okay. So I just want to say thank you. As you've just seen, I've got little post-it notes and underlining of the book, but it really is phenomenal because you have explored, what it explores is how society, the rules of society and how women should behave. You're challenging that. Why did you write the book?
I mean, firstly, thank you for that. And it's also really nice to know that I got the tone right because that's how it was meant to feel. And I think that I'm sure that you have gotten this in your life, as have I. But when you talk about sometimes feeling that discombobulation, right, around how you're supposed to age, what you're supposed to look like, I find that we shut people down really quickly around that by saying, oh, but you look amazing or you look great for your age or whatever. And I just wanted to give a space for us to be able to talk about some of the things that we might be struggling with that don't feel particularly feminist, to say. And the book really is an extension of all of that stuff. So I think that what I wanted to do was, after noticing a shift for women, it focuses mainly on women in their 40s, 50s and 60s. It is for women of any age. I've had younger women who've read it, who've said that it has resonated really strongly with them and can help them to see a path through rather than it being something that feels very dark and negative. For me, I saw the biggest amounts of change taking place in that demographic of women 40s, 50s and 60s. And I was also really interested in how we had occupied two different things that had shaped who we are. So most of us grew up during an analog time, but we are living in a digital world. So we grew up one way and now we have access to so many different thoughts and views. And that might be around how we live and what we do in addition to our in real life friends and families. It was also it shifts from decade to decade, but it was where I was seeing women making choices for themselves that seemed like quite a definitive departure from, in particular, I would say the baby boomer generation, which is, my mother's generation, in a way that seemed to be really interesting to me because also we were layering things like financial autonomy on top of that. And when we consider things such as beauty, that was something that was really interesting to me because we are living in a time where, cosmetic procedures and so on are only increasing and it's massively booming as an industry. And we're still getting that messaging around, what to look like and how to look like. And there's so much morality attached to a lot of it as well. And I was really keen to chart what some of that experience was like for women because it seemed to be far, far deeper than whatever was sitting on the surface of things.
No, because I think, a lot of women were in the midst of our faces, our bodies are changing, and society has so much demanded that we don't age, we don't look older. And there is this enormous financial industry that is making so much money out of making us feel bad about ourselves and making us then spend money to fix these things. You grew up, part of your childhood was in India. Does India have a similar view on aging and how, from a physical aesthetic point of view, but also as a sort of cultural point of view, is it different to the UK?
It's definitely different, but there are pros and cons as there are to everything. In India, my experience of it has been that aging is revered because it denotes wisdom. And so you respect your elders, and that shows up in many different ways, right? I would say, however, there is also a frailty narrative. So in terms of this expectation that once you reach a certain age, that's it. You know, you can't really do very much, and you shouldn't try to do different things, and other people, younger people, should be doing things for you. I think that can be really damaging and challenging, because I think it ages people faster than they need to be. It robs them of their physical autonomy and independence, and that it's not a given. So when I've seen, for example, the older women that I know in New Zealand, or even when I think closer to home to Scotland, what a lot of those older women are capable of is incredible. You know, I've seen women up in their 80s and their 90s bustle around, like go to the supermarket, go for walks and do certain things. Now, obviously, physical abilities notwithstanding, there isn't really any reason why I couldn't see the older women in my family, and definitely in India, not being able to do some of those things. Now, you do still have older women that are having to do those things because of necessity. But there is that sense that once you reach a particular age, that's it, you're just old. And that is something that I find exceptionally challenging. But from an aesthetics point of view, I think what really hit home to me was when I went to India a couple of years ago. So I usually go there every year or two, but after COVID, there was a significant gap of about 6 years when I hadn't gone. And one of the things that struck me when I was wandering around, whether that's socializing or walking on the street, was how people looked like themselves. And so I felt that
so older women were looking like old women.
Older women were looking like older women, but also women in their 30s and 40s, you know. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way, and I'm sure we will get into it, but I don't think I had noticed how much my mind had adjusted to the opposite of that from being in London and watching TV here and not realizing how much of that messaging I had absorbed. And it actually frightened me, to be honest, to not realize how gradual and how insidious that was until I was confronted with the reality of what it is like for a lot of other people who don't have the money, by the way, to get all of those aesthetic treatments done for themselves. And it was actually refreshing, and I was quite drawn to it, and I wanted to be surrounded by more of that.
Because it's real. And I think that's you touched on an interesting point there, because I think the way that we're being pushed into staying young, and there's a whole conversation around that, it seems that if you have the money, you can look young. So there seems to be a divide now, that those who have the money, I talk to kind of girlfriends and stuff, and if they haven't got lots of money, they're like, oh God, I'd love to do all these things. And then you talk to the women who do, and they're having all these things done, and it's like, it feels like this competitive thing. It's like, if you look young, then you've got money and status and wealth. And it's like in the old days when women were, actually it was attractive to be overweight because it meant you had wealth, so you could eat lots, etc. And it seems as this sort of, it's not very sort of financially democratic, if that's the right way of saying it. But actually that then throws up new questions in what your book explores, which I love, which is just looking at all a bit differently. Disattach yourself from the societal, patriarchal, horrendous sort of rules we've been sort of crammed into, and letting that go. And you do that so beautifully in the book about just look at it in a different way. And that really hit home to me. Do you how are you feeling about aging and what that's bringing for you?
It's complicated, I think. I think that something you hit upon earlier, which is around monetizing women's misery, that's something I feel really strongly about, because when I write about stuff like this, some people think that they know what I've said versus what I've actually said, which is, I'm not saying that aesthetics aren't important. We live in a very aesthetics driven society. So for most of us, they are important, right? I'm just saying that they don't need to be and should not be the most important thing on the list. two major reasons why, as you've just said, not everyone can afford to get these things done. And so what we are doing is creating a narrative by saying that the solution to your misery is going to be able to get all of these treatments done. Where does that place the women who can't afford to do that? And I think that it keeps them permanently disenfranchised. It keeps them permanently wishing and hungering for something that actually they probably don't even need. And I think that it also has really strong correlations with how we move our body. So fitness and exercise and training, which is, I feel very strongly that aesthetics cannot be your most important thing in the list of reasons as to why you do it, because it promotes fairly destructive behaviors. It doesn't actually really make you happy. It turns something that, if you think about when you were a kid and how you like to run about and move your body, it turns that it should be joyous. It should be as joyous as that. And it turns it into a chore and a punishment.
Men often see themselves as, when they perceive themselves, it's like, does my body work? I like my body because it works. I can do these things. Women, we've always been, in our generation, we have been conditioned. What does your body look like? That's purely what we're judged on. And it's so refreshing to hear something where it's going, can you reframe this? Can you look at it in a different way? Why do we need to attach ourselves to all these societal norms that actually cripple us, and physically as we get older? If you think you can't move, then you can't move. If everyone says you get older and you can't move, then you can't.
Yeah, and also we love to think in absolutes as well. I mean, as you get older, yeah, there are things that are very real. Like, you will need to do mobility work. You will need to do things like stretching to make your body feel good, in the same way that you would service a car or you would maintain anything else. And this expectation that our bodies should, despite whether it's what we do to them, how hard we push them, and even like there's a mental load that also has a physical output. But the idea that we shouldn't be doing things like that, like mobility work, to take care of them, that somehow doing that means that we're acknowledging that we're aging and we don't want to engage with that. That to me is fascinating. I mean, I understand it. I get it. I also used to think like that until I started doing some of it. And I was like, okay, my body might not recover in the same way. Back when I was drinking, for example, I definitely noticed how awful my hangovers were getting towards the end compared to when I was in my 20s, where I could literally go out 2 nights in a row and just be box fresh. But I also feel like there's a lot of things that we can do that ultimately, as you said, feeds into that overall life goal, which is, no matter whatever your gender is, the goal is the same, which is you want to be able to do the things that you love doing for as long as possible. Mm-hmm. And maybe we just need to ask ourselves some deeper questions. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable. What will get me to that goal? And unfortunately, the aesthetics goal is not something that is going to get you to that goal. For anyone who's ever been like ill, right? I'm not talking about a cold or a flu. I'm talking about something that maybe requires hospitalization or it's a serious illness. You know that when your body is that level of ill, what you look like doesn't count for anything. It doesn't help with anything. It doesn't help your body to fight off disease. And so really, I think it's about just recentering it back to what is important. What is the stuff that's going to get me through it? And I hope that that's the case that I make for in the book, which is to acknowledge that you can have space for all of those things, just maybe juggle the priorities of them slightly differently.
No, 100%. And that really, really resonates. And so many things you talk about in the book, from community as one gets older, from challenging what you're wearing, and you mentioned mutton dressed as lamb. And it's just, I think that is an older woman's complete fear. Do you think that that's changing? Do you think society is now, women are now debunking that?
Definitely, because I have an example for you. This is an older female relative who will go unnamed, but she and I were in a jewelry shop a few months ago, and there was another woman in there who was wearing, just very oversized, like very bold jewelry. She looked fantastic. And my relative elbowed me and just said, oh God, look at her jewelry. And I thought she was doing that to say how amazing it looked. And basically she was saying she's far too old to be wearing jewelry like that. And I was so taken aback by it, because I haven't heard anyone say anything like that to me in a really long time. It felt like such an old-fashioned way of looking at things. And the reason I tell you that story is for 2 reasons. One, I think it shows that I've created my social circles and the things that I absorb on social media to a degree, which means I'm not actually aware of people saying stuff like that, because I don't really like it, because it's very negative. The other thing that it reminded me of is that I hadn't heard women my age, or, you know, even sort of going up to spanning the whole of your 50s or early 60s, who would say something like that. And so that showed me that things are changing. I do believe that social media, for all of its negativity, the positive side of it is that it has shown us a much bigger world that is out there of how women are choosing to age. And it might not be something that you particularly pick for yourself, but you look at someone else taking a chance with something and you think, well, maybe I can do that too. And if it doesn't work out, then it's fine. But also that all of these like articles that go, you know, here are the jeans that you should be wearing in your midlife. It's just such...
Yes, your 20s, your 30s. Because what I find really interesting that you explore in the book, and what really has hit home to me, is for so many years, I know I have felt this, and I know women of our generation have, the patriarchy beautifully has sort of told us that we think we need to look nice to have power. If we look attractive, we can get the man, we can get the hat, we can get the security, ultimately looking nice. Like in Jane Austen time, if you weren't attractive, you were less likely to get a husband. So you had to make yourself as pretty as possible in order to have security, because you were left to be a sort of penniless sort of governess or whatever if you didn't. And we've been so ingrained into beauty means power. But what seems to be happening and what you talk about in the book, which I love, it's about changing those rules. Who am I really dressing up for? Who am I trying to look nice for? Can we let go of that power that we're dressing to attract a man and have power in our community? What does that mean to you?
That paradigm has definitely shifted. And I would say that the idea that if you look beautiful and you attract a man, it may be enough fuel in the tank to last through your 20s and 30s, but in your 40s and 50s, the wheels, I think, really start to come off that. Because what does that lead to? Let's say you've got the man, you know, you managed to snag him with your good looks. Is that man going to understand what it means to have an equal partnership with you? What is it that they add to your life? If you are in a long-term relationship, are you okay with how the domestic labor is split? What are the things that are taking place in there that make you feel seen or unseen? And those are the deeper questions that I think women start to ask themselves, because that goal of looking a particular way to attract a partner places so much power and emphasis on the man's side. And then I think there comes a point, and this is through women that I've interviewed for the book, to answers that came through the survey that I ran for it, is that fuel runs out, and then you have to contend with what is left behind and whether this is a person that you choose to have in your life. And it's not to say that your looks may not be important to you, but they require redefinition, because it's no longer about attracting a man, because it needs to be something more substantial than that. And that entire premise that you are sold, especially in your 20s, that is the path that you need to go down, I don't think pays off for anyone, because it's so oversimplified, because it makes you feel as if once you've got that sorted, your life is going to be okay and easy and fine. And I would say 99.9% of people know that that's definitely not the case. That's just not how life works. And also that, you know, there are women that I spoke to who were maybe 30, 40 years into a marriage, who were then out of those marriages, either because their partner had left them or they just realized that they couldn't take a minute longer. And so that reward that you're promised may not ever really pay off. And most of us know people who have been in extremely long relationships which aren't particularly happy. And so it's also about dismantling that idea that longevity means quality. And I think that women are coming to the conclusion that life actually can be quite long. In your 40s and 50s, you've still, hopefully, touch wood, got a lot of life left.
If we're looking after ourselves.
Right? Yeah.
And likewise, as you say, you think, you know, you snare the man in your 20s and you don't know what's going to happen. And your story, you snagged a beautiful, gorgeous human being who sadly passed away. And you had to deal with that, so that you're an example of, just because you get that, you know, the husband, it doesn't mean the path is going to go the trajectory that we're all supposed to keep to. And it didn't happen for me either. And one can feel, a lot of women do feel, it's like, well, if I haven't done that path, am I a failure? If I don't look amazing at my age and doing all the things I'm supposed to be doing, the wellness industry, like constantly telling you, you've got to have this, you've got to try this. Oh no, you shouldn't eat this with that or whatever. There's so much pressure on us at the moment. How do we deal with all of that?
I think that it is turning the noise down on some of that, and that is multifaceted. I don't think that just comes from one place. I think that with my story, I do appreciate it is a bit more unique in terms of circumstances, right? But that experience taught me that when it really comes down to it, what you look like doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't. And I think that most women come to that lesson either through trauma or illness, which is real sad because it shouldn't have to take either of those two things. But sometimes this world that we're surrounded by that teaches you to lionize beauty and youth so much, it's really hard to break through that if you don't have something like that pushing you through that. I think that my understanding of it is that it is about the people that you spend time with. I find it really, really difficult to talk to friends or family constantly about, for example, how much food they're eating, their weight, how unhappy they are with the way that they look. And I have had to have conversations with a few of them who I've wanted to have still in my life. I do, as I said before, heavily curate my social media feed. And even TV, I was watching Married at First Sight and I was thinking, my God, this is making me feel so weird about my own face, because I think it was one particular cycle where the majority of the women who were on there had very noticeable cosmetic work done. And that's their choice, and I get that. But I just thought, I don't need to justify this to anyone. If it's making me feel really strange and inadequate about my own looks, then I'm just going to remove that as an influence. And I also think, but a lot of it comes from the internal work. You can't just say to someone, oh, you need to love yourself, or you need to care less about this or that, because that's just not going to get you through. So I think that having an innate understanding of what is important to you, what are your values and ethics as they relate to what you want to look and feel like. And also, I think that evolution is something that I talk about a lot in the book, personal evolution, which is to understand that just because this is how you've always looked, it doesn't mean that you can't play about with things or change things up. You don't necessarily need to get loads of tattoos or piercings or dye your hair or anything like that. But I would just say it's important to bring some of the playfulness back into it. And I think the older we get, sometimes it can really feel hard to tap into that.
It seems what you seem to say a lot is like, what works for you? Be brave enough to go, if I want to have a tattoo at 60, 70, if it makes me happy, it's not hurting anybody. It's having that, it's really listening to yourself and going, how does that make me feel? I'm going to choose to do that. I'm going to choose to do the things that brings me joy. And if I wear big jewelry, or I choose to do whatever gives that internal joy, I think that is the call. That is the internal work. And that takes a lot, and that takes maturity that I think women in their 40s, 50s, 60s really start playing with. You started doing weightlifting, weights, and you are now, talk to me about your weightlifting journey and how that has changed your perception of your body.
I started to learn how to lift weights in my late 30s. It came from a need to just want to be physically stronger, which I was very embarrassed to say hadn't really occurred to me as something that I needed to do or focus on. It just wasn't even in my consciousness. And after Rob, my late husband, passed away, it came about as a result of need, because I realized that he wasn't going to be there to help me lift heavy things. If I wanted to call my dad, I could, but he was also getting older. My male friends, it just seemed really complicated, and also I just didn't want to rely on someone in that way. So I did ask a PT to show me a few things, and then ended up in this amazing gym that had a really warm and lovely atmosphere. It's a community gym. And that entire journey, from learning how to lift weights to competing at an amateur level, I very much say so, in that really was confronting, because when you are lifting those kinds of weights, you have to wear a singlet, which leaves nothing to the imagination. You also have to let go a bit of your ideas of hyperfemininity, and what is it that you're holding on to if you're telling yourself that you can't do something? Is it about what you think you're physically capable of, or is it also that you're a bit conscious of how you look doing those things? And I think that definitely taught me how to be less self-conscious about things, because men don't think about this stuff at all. They're just thinking about what they can do and how heavy they can lift and so on.
What their body, how capable is their body?
Exactly.
Rather than how it looks.
Yeah. I think that more so than weightlifting, though, what has been really confronting for me beauty-wise is a couple of years ago, I wanted to try combat sports. So I took up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and freestyle wrestling. You cannot do either of those sports with makeup on because it rubs off on people's clothing. So you're just not allowed. And you have to keep your nails short. And there are different things.
Can't wear earrings or jewellery.
Can't wear earrings or jewellery. And the idea of being makeup-free in front of people, and not just makeup-free, but sweaty, my hair plastered all over my face. Yesterday I did a class and someone actually had to tell me that I had saliva half strewn over my cheek, and I was mortified. And then afterwards I just thought, does it really matter? It doesn't at all. And that has been very confronting, but very necessary to realise that if the men are not worrying about this stuff, then neither should I.
Well, I think that it's just lovely for women now. For us, it's a journey we need to go on. And your book, She Wanted More. What do you want more of at the moment?
With regards to beauty?
With regards to beauty, what are you wanting more of to make you feel alive and just full of life? What I want more of is for me to remember who I am when I go into situations that make me feel a bit invisible, or where I feel uncertain because of my age. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes those spaces can really make me feel like I'm shrinking, and I notice it start to happening. I notice it when it starts to happen, and I almost have to, really hold my shoulders back high, and I have to actually give myself a pep talk in the toilets and just go, like, remember who you are. What are you doing? You have lived X number of years. You have all of this wealth of information, behind you. You are someone who is loved. You're funny. You're clever. You're all of these things. I really have to gas myself up. And so what I want more of is that really powerful, strong, positive voice, and less of the negative self-talk. And what I want for other women, actually, is I want them to be able to feel like they can be themselves without having to worry about being policed by other women, other men, and carrying the weight of other people's opinions. And I just want you to have fun with beauty, because that's what it should be, I think. Well, thank you, because literally reading your book, and I have read so many, I've underlined so much of it, and it really has given me a personal, I can look at this in a different way. And I absolutely love that. A massive thank you to Poorna Bell. Her book, She Wanted More, is out by now. If you're affected by the conversations we had on suicide, thesamaritans.org.uk, or call them on 116 123. That's it for True Reflections this week. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe wherever you are watching or listening. You can find me across your social media by searching at True Reflections Podcast. I'll be back next week with another celebrity to talk through their beauty experiences, their favourite products, and delve deeper into how the ideals of beauty shapes not just our physical appearance, but the core of our identities. Until then, have a lovely week.